Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. The name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. I'd like to welcome you, dear viewers, to another in our series, Contemporary Issues. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In this series, we're looking at a variety of questions which have been raised with regards to Islam in our times. The general issue that Islam, its beliefs and its practices, outdated. That to try to go to them, to seek to follow them, is to go backwards. It's not relevant to the 20th century. So this program is designed to touch on a number of the key issues which the Western-oriented individuals or Westerners themselves, try to break down or lower the issue or the image of Islam with regards to its relevance to our times. So we're touching in the program a variety of issues which the modern world consider to be important and which they consider Islam as being backwards with regards to them. Among them is the issue we're looking at in this segment of the program, the issue of rape in marriage. This is something which has appeared in the 20th century, something unheard of in history. In the 20th century, in particular in the last part of the 20th century, after the movement for women's rights, etc., in which women ended up in the West in a situation where they were equal to men. Marriage was the marriage of two equals who were perfectly equal in all regards. And part of that equality meant that the relations within marriage, no one had, any position of authority. Though in traditional Christian custom, the man was the head of the family. Coming out of the Jewish customs, the man was the head of the family, the final decision was in his hands, etc., etc. However, with the secularization of Western society, these concepts, these values were thrown aside, for the sake of what they conceived to be women's rights, but that is making women equal to men. So, in a marital situation, it then meant that if a woman decided she did not want to have sexual relations with her husband, that was her right to decide to do so and to prohibit him. And if he insisted and took his right, or what he perceived to be his right, this would be classified as rape. Rape being classified as sex by force, where a person has forced himself on the other one. In other words, there's no consent on the part of the woman. This is what it's going to be, because we don't have too many issues or cases of women raping men. So what we're looking at here is a situation where a woman does not give her consent, and this now has been classified as rape, whether it is within marriage or outside of marriage. Outside of marriage, everybody can understand this. But Western civilization in the last half of the century, 20th century, as we go into the 21st century, it began to classify within the bounds of marriage a case or issue of rape, where it was a crime for a husband to have sexual relations with his wife without her consent. This is the crime. And this is the Western view of the family structure. From the Islamic point of view, Islam does not recognize this as a crime. Why? Because the marriage contract, the very foundation of the marriage contract, involves the husband, on one hand, being obliged to look after and to maintain the wife. That is her right, that she is looked after and maintained. And on his part, it is his right that she obey him and give herself to him. This is a basic concept in marriage in Islam, and that is understood within the contract of marriage. So it is inconceivable that a man would then become a criminal for taking his right. Now, of course, if it means that he is going to break her bones, blacken her eyes, these kind of things, of course, this is illegal. Islamically, it's not permitted for a man to brutalize, to abuse a woman in this way, etc. But, if he insists and forces himself upon her without, as I said, brutalizing her, beating her up and punching her into submission, things like this, then this would not be considered to be a crime from Islamic perspective. In fact, she is told that she should understand that according to Islam, she is obliged to give herself to her husband. That is the basic understanding. And of course, this situation doesn't arise, because of course for Western women, she would look at this and say, what? You mean to say I don't have the right to say no? Well, yeah, in your situation where you have gotten married under the basis that you have the right to say no, then of course in a situation where you don't have that right, it would seem to you to be an abuse, you don't have your rights, and so on and so on. But in the Islamic marriage system, this is something which people have accepted. This is of course the Western woman will say, oh, poor oppressed Muslim woman. But the other point of view is that this is something that the woman accepts because it is part of the divine decree of God. The Prophet has taught this. This is what was understood, and people live by it without problems. Now, it is true, the Prophet ﷺ emphasized it by saying, for example, that a woman, if her husband calls her and she's at the stove, she's cooking, she should stop that and come to him. This is basic. Now, on the other hand, there is no similar instruction to the man. That if your woman calls you, drop whatever you're doing, your business, you're at work, you're doing having an important meeting, your wife calls up on the phone and says, I need you, so you drop your business, stop your business and run back home. No. This was not been put on the man because, on one hand, his business sphere outside the home, etc., is not one where you can just drop things and come back like this. In the case of the woman, she's within the home. Secondly, and probably more importantly, is that it is possible for a woman who does not desire sexual relations with her husband, she doesn't feel up to it, doesn't desire it, doesn't feel for it, etc., to give herself to him and carry on. This is something that God has made women capable of doing. A man who has no desire, has no, etc., he is incapable of having these relations. It becomes virtually impossible for him. This is why we have the issue of prostitution. Prostitution is female prostitution. Though they refer to male prostitution, this has to do with homosexual relations. But in terms of male and female relationships, a woman, a prostitute, is able to have relations with 10, 15, 20 men, one night after the other. How? She is able to do that because she can detach herself. Her body is functioning, her mind is elsewhere, whatever, she's able to do that. This is, of course, Islam doesn't support it or say, okay, because women can do this, it's okay for them to be prostitutes. Of course not. Islam is totally opposed to prostitution. But the point of the matter here is that the woman is capable of giving herself. A man would not be capable of doing that. If he's having heterosexual relations, it is impossible for him to do that. So, the situation where this relationship in terms of the man's position of authority within the home and also his right to conjugal relations, this is something as a part and parcel of Islamic marriage, which by women understanding this relationship, accepting it, this is from God, etc., and living by it, there is harmony in the family. She gives herself, if she doesn't feel like it, whatever, she might tell him whatever, and if he says, okay, fine. But if he doesn't, if he is in need, in that sense, then she gives herself. Finish. And they're able to carry on. It is not a problem for her.
with skill and strategy,
Defend Islam.
with patience and positivity,
Protect yourselves from doubts.
with hope and humility.
To have belief that Al-Islam is the only correct religion, the only truth.
Learn the techniques that help in facing emerging challenges to Islam. Join Haitham Al-Haddad in The Art of Defending Islam every Thursday at 11:30 p.m. Saudi Arabia and 12:30 a.m. UAE on Peace TV.
Although Christianity doesn't have a single credible source to justify her claims of the crucifixion, she yet continues to propagate her myth. They do this by hiding many of their deceptions behind cleverly designed doctrines. Did you know that Christianity stands or falls at the cross? So how did they do this? Join me for the series called The Cross Questions.
Probe the past that proves Christianity in practice is fictitious in The Cross Questioned. Every Sunday at 11:30 p.m. Saudi Arabia and 12:30 a.m. UAE on Peace TV.
When I reverted to Islam 7 years ago,
I was born into a Christian family.
I love Allah, love the deen, I love the community.
There was no relationship between what the preacher was saying and what was in the Bible.
PhD holder in Christian theology to come and teach, but the book that he was using was the writings of Imam Ghazali.
Acquired knowledge cannot reach an absolute fact.
If you are a Muslim, you have to be equipped first with good knowledge of your deen.
My desire is to see the whole world become Muslim.
Alhamdulillah, our Islam is a way of life.
A journey of 1,000 miles must begin with a single step. Watch Islamic Quotient next on Peace TV.
A man who has no desire, has no etc., etc., he is incapable of having these relations. It becomes virtually impossible for him. I mean, this is why we have the issue of prostitution. Prostitution is female prostitution. Though they refer to male prostitution, this has to do with homosexual relations. But in terms of male and female relationships, a woman, a prostitute, is able to have relations with 10, 15, 20 men, one right after the other. How? She is able to do that because she can detach herself. Her body is functioning, her mind is elsewhere, whatever, she's able to do that. This is, of course, Islam doesn't support it or say, okay, because women can do this, it's okay for them to be prostitutes. Of course not. Islam is totally opposed to prostitution. But the point of the matter here is that the woman is capable of giving herself. A man would not be capable of doing that. If he's having heterosexual relations, it is impossible for him to do that. So, the situation where this relationship in terms of the man's position of authority within the home and also his right to conjugal relations, this is something as a part and parcel of Islamic marriage, which by women understanding this relationship, accepting it, this is from God, etc., and living by it, there is harmony in the family. She gives herself, if she doesn't feel like it, whatever, she might tell him whatever, and if he says, okay, fine. But if he doesn't, if he is in need, in that sense, then she gives herself. Finish. And they're able to carry on. It is not a problem for her. But in the Western situation, where that woman is not feeling like it, she's not up to it, say, no, the man is denied. What does he do? He has his desires, etc. He goes to find a mistress, he goes to a prostitute, whatever, so to fulfill his desires. So this promotes the breakdown of marriage. And of course, where a man and woman are equal partners in that sense, that they're totally equal, there's no authority in one's hands or in the other's, then when they reach a position where neither of them agree on a point, they both disagree on a point, and neither of them is prepared to back down, then what happens? They part ways. Okay, you go your way, I go mine. That is the end result. As a result, you find that the rate of divorce over the last 50 years of the century has increased massively. So much so the divorce rate is beyond the 50% mark with relationship to marriages. In America, in England, it's 40-something% and rising. And this is one among the fundamental reasons for this breakdown of the family. That the hierarchy, the structure of society, which has a man as the head of the society, a ruler or a president, a leading figure who makes decisions for the society, that this is, just as we need that on a societal level, we need it on a family level. The family is the basic building block of the society. As you need a leader there in the society as a whole, you need a leader in the family. Of course, enlightened leadership is the best leadership. Ignorant leadership is the worst. So education, of course, as to roles and responsibilities, etc., it's very important that all of this be included within the educational system of the society, the Muslim society, that people are educated to the proper roles, proper fulfillment of their roles within marriage. So, this basic point, as we said, from the Islamic perspective, this modern ruling which the West has taken on, some states in the West, actually it's not in all the countries, so I can't say it's all countries in the West, but in the United States of America and in others, the idea of rape in marriage is, from the Islamic perspective, irrelevant. And it is a sign of the breakdown of the family structure in the West. The other issue is that of violence in marriage. And, from Western perspective, the finger is often pointed, at Muslims because of the fact that there is permission given to husbands to hit their wives. There's permission given. It is in the Quran itself. However, the circumstances are not looked at. One is not looking at. It's just the point that permission has been given. That's it. Now, in the West, of course, this has been going on. Though it has been legislated out, it's not permissible for a husband to hit his wife, etc., even to hit his children. Our mother and father, it's not allowed for them to even to hit children. The whole concept of violence, of, what was classified as violence, of any kind of corporal punishment, hitting, is out. Been cancelled, basically, in Western society. A husband and a wife, if they hit their child because of some wrongdoing, whatever, then, and the child authorities find out, they will come and take that child away. Take the child away from the parents. The parents may have to undergo counseling because they have spanked their child. Now, this view actually is a product of Dr. Spock, medical doctor back in the 50s, not Spock from the Enterprise, but this medical doctor, who wrote a book which became the standard book for child rearing in the West, in which he basically proposed the idea that children should be treated like adults, that they're just small adults, and we should treat them as such. In the same way, when you're dealing with an adult, you want them to do something you don't just hit them if they don't do what you want. You don't hit them, that's not your response. You try other methods and means. That's the same thing with children. Don't hit them. Of course, what that has led in the West, where hitting, corporal punishment, has been removed from the family, removed from the schools, is that, how many cases now of violence against teachers, where Teachers are going to school in fear of their own students. Parents are held in fear from their own children. So many cases, children, violently attacking their parents, etc., etc. And the school situation where, any kind of discipline is virtually non-existent in major city schools in the major capitals of the West. Islam, of course, does recognize corporal punishment. Within the family, from the level of the child, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, teach your children the prayer when they're 7 and spank them for it when they're 10. Teach them prayer when they're 7 and spank them for it when they're 10. Spank them to ensure that they get in line, pray in the times when their parents are praying, etc., to get them in the habit of praying, so that it's not something brought on them at the age of puberty, which they're not used to doing and which they would naturally rebel against. Because the age of puberty and onwards, there's early teen years, are the ages of rebellion. So they're taught it from an early stage. And again, spanking them for it at the age of 10 is not, lashing them and beating them. And of course, any kind of hitting should not involve, the breaking of skin, bleeding, and welting, and all these kind of things. Now, as we find, it's mentioned, as I said, in Surah Nisa, where Allah does give permission to the husband to hit his wife. We find Prophet Muhammad ﷺ saying in a hadith, which is authentic, found in Sahih Muslim, you have rights over your women that they do not allow anyone you dislike into your home. If they disobey you, you may spank them. And the woman's right on you is that you clothe her and feed her justly according to your means. Now, the concept here is not one of any act which displeases the husband, he is now allowed to hit his wife. And I mean, the issue of hitting a wife, this is something, it is found in Judaic law, it was in Christianity. So it's not something like Islam has introduced it. Islam has limited the circumstances under which it can occur. For example, a man, if his wife spills his tea or burns his shirt, he's not allowed to just go and hit her simply because of a mistake like this. Not for mistake. This has to do with, disobedience, where she has her level of disobedience reached a point where it threatens the overall status of the marriage itself. He may hit her as a means of catching her attention. Not hit her in the sense he puts on boxing gloves and he starts, pounding on her. No, of course not. It's not this kind of hitting. Prophet ﷺ forbade it. In clear statements he made, for example, he said, do not beat your wives as you would your servant girls in pre-Islamic times. Don't do that. So hitting them is one of catching their attention. That's a tap, a hit of tapping proportions, not of bruising, brutalizing proportions, to catch their attention. Hey, I am the authority here. You should be following my instructions. So it is under those conditions that Islam permits it. And we should consider that because of the extended family structure that there is, if a man starts to beat up on his wife, relatives are going to come in. They're going to get involved. They're going to stop this man. Where in the West, where the family has become a nuclear family, a man and his wife, nobody the man has to answer to. Though the laws are there to say no beating, they beat more than in the Eastern world where it is permitted. This is the end result, because these things you cannot stop merely by putting it in the law. With that, dear viewers, I'd like to thank you for being with us in this segment of our program in which we have looked at two major issues. One, rape in marriage, and the other one, violence in marriage. With that, dear viewers, we'd like to thank you for being with us and hope that you continue to follow our program, Contemporary Issues. And I now bid you farewell. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Bhika and Daud Wansby Ali.
Hey kids, time is very precious.
This life is a gift from Allah.
You take